At New Year's dinner, my sister clinked her glass and proclaimed, "We took a vote. You're officially cut off." Laughter followed. I smiled, pulled out an envelope, and declared, "Then you won't be needing this." The room remained silent when she saw what was inside. I, 32M, had always been the family ATM. Growing up, I learned early that love in our household came with a price tag attached, and I was the one expected to pay it. The pattern started in college when my sister needed help with tuition. Then it was my parents' mortgage when dad lost his job. My brother's wedding expenses. Sister's divorce lawyer fees. The family vacation that somehow became my responsibility to fund. Each time, they promised it would be the last time. Each time, I believed them because that's what family does, right? I worked 80-hour weeks at my consulting firm, climbing the ladder while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. My own apartment was a studio in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, while they lived in houses I helped pay for. I drove a used Honda while my brother cruised in a BMW lease I co-signed. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. Last year changed everything. I'd been seeing someone special, really special. Sarah was different from anyone I'd dated before. Independent, successful, with her own marketing agency. She didn't need my money, which was refreshing after years of relationships that felt more like financial arrangements. We'd been together 8 months when I started thinking about proposing. I'd been saving for a ring, something worthy of her, something that would show her how serious I was about our future. The money sat in a separate account, growing slowly as I added to it each month after covering my family's various expenses. Then came the emergency. Mom called crying about medical bills. Dad's heart surgery hadn't been fully covered by insurance, and they were looking at $20,000 in debt. The stress was killing them both, she said. They might lose the house I'd already put so much money into. I stared at my engagement ring fund. $22,000. Enough to solve their immediate crisis and maybe finally get my family back on stable ground. Sarah would understand, I told myself. We could wait a little longer for the ring. So I transferred the money. Every cent I'd saved for our future went to cover Dad's medical bills. I called Sarah that night to explain, expecting understanding, maybe even admiration for putting family first. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me the question that would haunt me for months. When does it end? I didn't have an answer because I'd never really thought about it that way. It had always just been what I did, what was expected. She told me she needed time to think, and I felt the first real crack in what I thought was our solid foundation. 2 weeks later, she ended things. She said she couldn't compete with my family for my attention and resources. She'd seen enough to know that I would never put our relationship first, that there would always be another emergency, another crisis that required my money. She wasn't wrong, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. That breakup was my wake-up call, but apparently, my family didn't get the memo. The requests kept coming. Sister needed help with her kids' private school tuition. Brother wanted to start a business and needed seed money. Mom thought we should all go on a cruise together to celebrate Dad's recovery. On my dime, naturally. I started saying no. Not aggressively, just no. I couldn't afford it right now. I had my own goals I was working toward. I needed to rebuild my savings after the medical bills. The reaction was swift and brutal. Suddenly, I was selfish, ungrateful. They'd done so much for me growing up, and this was how I repaid them? The emotional manipulation was masterful, refined by years of practice. But I held firm. For the first time in my adult life, I kept my money in my own account. I started building up my savings again. I began looking at apartments in better neighborhoods. I even started dating again, though I was more cautious this time. The family gatherings became tense. They'd make little comments about my new attitude. Sister would joke about how success had gone to my head. Brother would pointedly talk about family loyalty while looking directly at me. Mom would sigh dramatically about how hard things were getting. I endured it because despite everything, they were still my family. I thought maybe once they adjusted to the new dynamic, things would improve. I was naive enough to believe that our relationships could exist without the constant financial transactions. New Year's Eve was approaching, and Mom insisted on hosting dinner at her house. The same house I'd helped save from foreclosure twice. She said it would be nice to have everyone together to start fresh in the new year. I should have seen it coming. The dinner was elaborate, prime rib, expensive wine, all the fixings. I noticed how much effort had gone into the presentation, how everyone seemed more dressed up than usual. There was an energy in the room that felt different, expectant. We ate and made small talk about work, about the weather, about anything except the elephant that had been living in our family room for months. I started to relax, thinking maybe this was their olive branch, their way of accepting the new boundaries I'd established. After dessert, Sister stood up with her wine glass. She had this smile on her face that I recognized from childhood, the one she wore right before she got me in trouble with our parents. She tapped her glass with her knife, calling for attention. She announced that they'd all been talking, that they'd had some long conversations about the family dynamic and how things had changed over the past year. She said they understood I was going through some kind of phase, trying to find myself, or whatever, but they'd decided enough was enough. Then came the words that would change everything. We took a vote. You're officially cut off. The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. Not just polite chuckles, but genuine, hearty laughter. Dad was wiping his eyes. Brother was slapping his knee. Mom was covering her mouth, trying to contain her giggles. They thought it was hilarious. The idea that I could cut them off, that I had any power in this relationship, was apparently the funniest thing they'd heard all year. Sister explained that they'd decided if I wanted to play hardball, they could play too. No more family dinners. No more birthday calls. No more holidays together. I was out until I came to my senses and remembered who my real family was. I sat there, watching the people I'd supported for years laugh at the idea that I might have boundaries, might have my own needs and goals. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that had been building for months finally crystallizing into perfect clarity. I smiled back at them. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I stood up and placed it on the table in front of Sister. I told them that if I was officially cut off, then they wouldn't be needing this. The laughter died immediately. Sister's face went pale as she recognized the envelope. It was from the law firm I'd been working with. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it and read the contents. The room fell silent as she realized what she was looking at. It was a detailed financial statement, prepared by my attorney, showing exactly how much money I'd given to the family over the past 8 years. Every loan, every emergency payment, every gift. The total came to over $240,000. But that wasn't the real shock. The second page outlined the repayment terms I was now demanding. With interest calculated at a reasonable rate, the total amount owed was just over $300,000. I was calling in every debt, every favor, every penny I'd ever given them. Brother asked if this was some kind of joke, but his voice cracked when he said it. Mom's face had gone white as she processed the numbers. Dad just sat there, staring at the paper like it might disappear if he looked hard enough. I explained that my attorney had advised me that while family loans were often informal, the documentation I'd kept over the years was sufficient to establish a legal debt. Text messages asking for money, bank transfer records, even some emails where they'd acknowledged the amounts and promised repayment. Sister tried to laugh it off, saying I was being ridiculous, that family doesn't charge family interest. I reminded her that according to her own announcement, I wasn't family anymore. I was officially cut off, remember? That made these business transactions, nothing more. The panic started setting in as they realized I wasn't bluffing. Brother pointed out that they couldn't possibly pay that much money. I nodded sympathetically and mentioned that my attorney had suggested we might need to discuss asset seizure to satisfy the debt. The house Mom was sitting in, for instance, had my name on the mortgage documents as a co-signer. That gave me certain legal rights. Dad tried a different approach, appealing to my sense of family loyalty. He reminded me of everything they'd done for me growing up, how they'd raised me and supported me through college. I listened politely, then pointed out that raising your children isn't a loan. It's the basic responsibility of parenthood. And my college tuition had been covered by scholarships and student loans I'd paid back myself. The conversation that followed was ugly. Accusations flew. They called me vindictive, heartless, cruel. They said I was destroying the family over money. The irony was staggering. They were upset about me prioritizing money in our relationships. I stayed calm throughout their outrage. I'd expected this reaction, had prepared for it. My attorney had warned me that financial disputes with family members often got emotional quickly. Sister demanded to know what I really wanted, what would make me drop this lawsuit. It was a fair question, and I'd given it a lot of thought over the past 2 weeks. I told them I wanted exactly what they'd just given me. I wanted to be cut off. I wanted them to stop treating me like a bank and start treating me like a person. I wanted relationships that weren't built on financial transactions. But I also wanted acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed for them. I wanted recognition of the opportunities I'd given up, the relationship I'd lost, the life I'd put on hold to support their choices. The repayment plan I was proposing was actually generous. Small monthly payments over 10 years, with the option to accelerate if their financial situations improved. I wasn't trying to bankrupt them. I was trying to teach them the value of what I'd been providing all these years. Mom started crying, asking how I could do this to them. I reminded her that I wasn't doing anything to them. I was simply asking for my money back. Money they'd asked to borrow, promised to repay, and then apparently forgotten about entirely. The dinner party broke up in chaos. Brother stormed out, threatening to contest any legal action. Sister crumpled up the papers and threw them at me, screaming that I'd regret this. Mom and Dad sat in stunned silence as their children fought over money they'd helped me give away. I left the house that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I wanted to hurt my family, but because I'd finally stood up for myself. I'd finally said enough. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and predictable. My phone buzzed constantly with angry messages for the first few days. Brother called me every name in the book. Sister sent long, rambling texts about family loyalty and how I was breaking Mom's heart. Even some cousins I barely spoke to reached out to tell me how disappointed they were in my behavior. I blocked most of the numbers after the first week. My attorney had advised me that any communication about the debt should go through his office anyway. It was easier than I expected to cut off the constant stream of guilt and manipulation. But the silence that followed was harder. No more daily calls from Mom. No more random texts from Sister about her kids. No more invitations to family events I'd been funding for years. I'd gotten what I asked for, complete separation from the family dynamic that had been draining me, but it still felt strange. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into a major project that required travel, spending 3 weeks in Seattle helping a client restructure their operations. The distance helped me gain perspective on what had happened and what I wanted to do next. When I returned, there was a message from my attorney. Dad had called his office, asking about payment plans and whether we could negotiate the terms. It was the first indication that they were taking the situation seriously. I agreed to a meeting, but only with my attorney present. We met at his office on a Thursday afternoon. Dad came alone, looking older than I remembered. The past month had clearly been hard on him. He told me he understood why I was angry, that maybe they'd taken advantage of my generosity over the years. He asked what it would take to make this right, to get the family back together. I appreciated his approach. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged their part in the situation. But I also made it clear that paying back the money was only part of what needed to happen. I needed to see real changes in how they approached relationships, how they treated my boundaries. We worked out a modified payment plan, smaller amounts over a longer period, with the understanding that I wasn't looking to punish anyone. I just wanted fair treatment going forward. Dad asked if I'd consider coming to Easter dinner if they started making payments. I told him I'd think about it, but that rebuilding trust would take time. Update 2. Easter came and went without me. I spent the day hiking instead, enjoying the first spring weather of the year. It felt good to have a holiday that wasn't centered around family obligation and financial stress. But 3 months into the payment plan, something unexpected happened. Sister called me directly, not through the attorney. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, less certain than I was used to hearing. She told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking since New Year's. She'd started therapy, trying to understand why the family dynamics had gotten so unhealthy. Her therapist had helped her see how they'd all participated in treating me unfairly. She wasn't calling to negotiate the debt. She said they'd continue making payments as agreed. She was calling to apologize. Really apologize, not the manipulative non-apologies I was used to from our family. She acknowledged that they'd taken my generosity for granted, that they'd never considered what I was sacrificing to support everyone else. She said she was ashamed of how they'd laughed at me that night, how cruel they'd been when I tried to set boundaries. The conversation lasted over an hour. We talked about childhood patterns, about how Mom and Dad had raised us to compete for attention and resources. She admitted that she'd always resented my success, but had been happy to benefit from it financially. By the end of the call, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in years: genuine connection. Not based on money or obligation, but on honest communication and mutual respect. Update 3. It's been 8 months since that New Year's dinner, and my family looks completely different now. Not everyone came around. Brother still barely speaks to me and makes his payments through automatic transfer without any personal contact. But sister and I have rebuilt our relationship on much healthier ground. Mom and dad took longer to adjust, but they've made real efforts to change how they interact with me. They ask about my life without immediately segueing into their financial problems. They've started planning gatherings that don't revolve around expensive activities they expect me to fund. The most surprising development came last month. I'd started dating again, and when I mentioned Sarah to sister during one of our weekly calls, she encouraged me to reach out. She said anyone who tried to protect me from this family dysfunction probably deserved another chance. Sarah and I met for coffee, and I was honest about everything that had happened. I showed her the payment plan, explained how I'd restructured my boundaries with my family. She was impressed that I'd finally stood up for myself, but more importantly, she could see that the changes were real and lasting. We're taking things slowly, but for the first time in years, I'm in a relationship where my partner doesn't have to compete with my family's financial demands. We're planning a vacation together next month, paid for with money I saved instead of giving away. The debt will be fully repaid in about 7 years at the current rate. Some people might think I was too harsh, that family should forgive and forget. But I've learned that real forgiveness requires acknowledgement and change, not just the passage of time. I have a family again, but it's built on respect instead of dependency. That envelope I pulled out at dinner didn't just demand repayment of money. It demanded repayment of dignity, boundaries, and the right to be valued as more than just a source of funding. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is teaching them how to treat you properly, even if the lesson comes with interest charges.